The deserted road seemed peaceful that night, lit only by the headlights of a few lone cars. The silence was suddenly broken by the sound of an engine accelerating at full speed. A car passed, well above the speed limit. In the car, police officer. Felipe immediately alerted himself. His eyes narrowed as he picked up the radio. "Central, this is Sergeant Felipe. Vehicle speeding on Highway 217. I'll address it." He turned on the sirens and sped off, the red and blue light illuminating the dark road. The car hesitated, but soon stopped on the shoulder. Felipe got out of the car with the firm posture of someone who has done this thousands of times. But something about that car made him stop. A woman in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel tightly, her face etched with worry. What caught his attention most was the nurse's uniform, still dirty from the long shift. Felipe approached cautiously and knocked on the glass. "Madam, do you know how fast you were driving?" The woman, her voice shaking, looked at him, her eyes teary. "Please, I know I went over the limit, but my son is very sick. He needs a hospital now." Felipe tried to remain calm, but his instinct told him something was wrong. He glanced at the back seat, and that's when the shock happened. Lying there, with a pale face and shallow breathing, was a 10-year-old boy. He could barely speak, but his eyes said it all. Felipe froze. You won't believe what happened next. What the police officer discovered at that moment left everyone in shock, and the fate of this family turned upside down. Stay until the end to see how this exciting story will unfold. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming surprises. Felipe maintained his firm posture, but inside he felt a growing uneasiness. With the flashlight in hand, he illuminated the interior of the car to better check the situation. The woman in the driver's seat looked distressed, her gaze alternating between him and the boy lying in the back. "Documents, please," he asked, maintaining a professional tone. The woman hesitated for a moment, as if her mind was torn between obeying and begging once again to continue on her way. But with shaking hands, she took the bag and handed the documents to Felipe. He held up his driver's license and directed the beam of light at the printed name, Camila Martins. Time seemed to freeze. His heart leapt inside his chest. He knew that name. I knew it very well. He slowly raised his eyes and for the first time took a closer look at the woman's face. The features were different, more tired, more mature. But now, in the dim light, he recognized her. Camila. His voice was almost a whisper, filled with disbelief. The woman's eyes widened, looking as shocked as he felt. Felipe. His name escaped her lips like a memory she had long tried to forget. For a moment, the two stood there, motionless, as if time had returned to 10 years ago. But the silence was quickly broken by a faint sound coming from the back seat. The boy moaned softly, his breathing still labored. Camila turned around on impulse. "Felipe, please, I know this is a shock, but my son is very sick. I need to take him to the hospital now." Felipe swallowed. The confusion in his mind was immense, but something inside him forced him to look at the boy again. And when he did, something even more disturbing happened. There was something in the boy's face, something familiar. Felipe felt a tightness in his chest. A thought began to form in his mind, but he quickly shook it off. It couldn't be. But then, unable to help himself, he asked the question that would change everything. "How old is he?" Camila hesitated, a second of silence that felt like an eternity. 10 years, she replied, almost in a whisper. Felipe felt as if the ground beneath his feet had disappeared. Exactly how long since he and Camila last saw each other? His eyes widened, his breathing quickened. Is he my son?" The silence was piercing. Camila lowered her gaze, as if fighting everything that was behind that question. But in the end, she knew she couldn't lie. "Yes, Felipe. He is your son, The world around Felipe seemed to fall apart. Felipe's heart hammered in his chest. The revelation hit him like a punch, leaving him breathless. His gaze went from Camilla to the boy, absorbing the truth that changed everything in an instant. "Luke, your son." The boy groaned again in the back seat, his breathing short and labored. His face was pale, sweaty, and every second that passed seemed to make him even weaker. Reality fell on Felipe like an unbearable weight. There was no time for questions, accusations, or mixed emotions. The boy needed help. Camilla gripped the steering wheel tightly, her voice shaking with despair. "Felipe, I beg you, if you want to arrest me later, do so, but now let me pass. My son is very sick." Felipe took a deep breath. He couldn't just let them go alone, not now, not after what he had just discovered. On impulse, he put the documents away and stared at Camilla. "Get in the car and follow me. I will escort you to the hospital." Camilla opened her eyes wide, not believing what she was hearing. "What? No discussion, Camilla, now!" Without hesitating any longer, she put the car in gear and accelerated as soon as Felipe ran to the car. He turned on the sirens and stepped on the gas, making his way down the deserted road. The tension inside the cars was palpable. In the rearview mirror, Felipe saw Camilla's car stuck to the back of his vehicle. But what really caught his attention was the frail figure in the back seat, the son he never knew he had, and now, for the first time, he was doing something for himself. "And I didn't intend to fail." Felipe kept his hands firmly on the steering wheel, his eyes focused on the road while the car's red and blue lights flashed non-stop. The sound of the siren cut through the early morning silence, announcing the urgency of this mission. He sped up, making his way between the few cars he found along the way. The car's radio crackled when he activated the control unit. "This is Sergeant Felipe. I'm escorting a medical emergency to Central Hospital. I request priority at traffic lights and support in traffic control." The answer came immediately. "Understood, Sergeant." Support sent. Felipe couldn't avoid constantly looking at the rearview mirror. Camilla's car was right behind, and through the glass he could see her silhouette writhing in worry. In the back seat the boy moved slightly, but his weakness was evident. Her chest rose and fell with difficulty, and with each new moan, Camilla looked back with teary eyes. "Hold on tight, my love. We're almost there," she murmured, trying to hide the desperation in her voice. Felipe felt a lump in his throat. He had dealt with stressful situations before. He had faced dangerous criminals. He had saved lives. But nothing prepared him for this. The road seemed to stretch before them, and each kilometer seemed like an eternity. Then, suddenly, what they feared most happened. A traffic jam. Lines of cars stretched ahead, blocking the way to the hospital. Felipe swore softly. They couldn't waste time. With a quick movement, he parked the vehicle in the middle of the road and jumped out of the car. With firm and authoritarian gestures, he began to coordinate the drivers to clear the way. "Police! We need to pass!" The drivers, surprised, quickly reacted. Little by little, they moved their cars, creating a narrow passage for the police car and Camilla's car. Felipe ran back to the car, taking deep breaths to stay focused. As soon as he got into the car, he accelerated again, with Camilla following, in closely behind. Now, more than ever, he knew he couldn't fail. Time seemed to be running against them, but Felipe promised himself he would do whatever was impossible to get that boy to the hospital in time. When they finally saw the Central Hospital, in the distance, Felipe felt the weight of the past few minutes lifting a little. The road now seemed calmer, but the knot in his stomach remained. With every second that passed, Lucas's situation worsened in his mind. The boy, who until moments before he didn't even know existed, was there, fighting for his life. Felipe accelerated. The car, now focusing entirely on the hospital entrance. He was determined not to fail. When the hospital appeared ahead, he quickly radioed for help. "This is Sergeant Felipe. "We are arriving at the Central Hospital. I request medical staff." At the entrance for the boy with breathing difficulties, the answer came instantly. "Understood, Sergeant. Medical support on the way." With the sirens still on, Felipe stopped the vehicle in front of the hospital. Camilla, behind him, quickly parked the car and, with a quick movement, got out of the vehicle, running to the hospital door. Felipe also got out of his vehicle, ready to help. He went to Camilla's car door, where the boy was still weak, pale, almost unconscious. Camilla quickly took Lucas in her arms, but he was very weak. "He is very weak. He needs urgent help," Camilla said, already with tears in her eyes, as she ran towards the hospital entrance. Felipe, without thinking twice, ran beside her, helping with the boy. As soon as they arrived at the hospital door, the medical team was waiting for them. The boy was quickly placed on a stretcher and taken inside. Camilla tried to follow, but a nurse stopped her. "Only family members can enter," said the nurse with a serious expression. Camilla hesitated, then turned to Felipe, a desperate look. "He's his father." Confirmation came from Camilla, who, with a small wave, allowed Felipe to go inside with Lucas. Felipe felt a whirlwind inside him. The weight of the responsibility of being Lucas's father has never been clearer. He entered with the team, trying to remain calm, but the fear of what could happen to his son consumed him inside. The doctor, with a firm stance, quickly explained the situation. "He is very serious, but we managed to stabilize him. Now he needs more care. Let's take him to the emergency room." Felipe looked at Camilla, who was there beside him, also visibly affected, but she didn't say a word. The silence between the two was heavy, but for a moment Felipe felt as if he was carrying out an important mission. He was there, now no longer as a police officer, but as a father. The doctor led them both to the waiting room, where they could wait for news about Lucas. Felipe observed in silence Camilla's face, whose expressions were a mix of relief and sadness. She was visibly exhausted, but also grateful for Felipe's help. Felipe sat down, but couldn't take his eyes off Lucas, who was being taken to the emergency room. Deep down, he knew that this situation was just the beginning of something much bigger, something he never imagined he would have to face, but he couldn't get away from it now. He had a son to take care of. Time seemed to drag by in the hospital waiting room. The tension between Felipe and Camilla was palpable, but at the same time there was a kind of silent connection between the two. They were both there, but in very different worlds, with unresolved histories and resentments. Felipe looked at Camilla, trying to understand everything that had happened between them, and even more so, what the future could hold for what was left of his family. She, in turn, avoided his gaze, but her expression told everything: tiredness, frustration, and perhaps a shadow of hope. The silence between them was broken only by the times Camilla looked at the emergency door, anxious, as if any second was crucial to knowing what would happen to Lucas. Felipe knew that she feared the worst news, and deep down he was also consumed by the same anguish. Felipe finally broke the silence. "Camilla, I know this is all a shock for you, but I can't. Stay out of his life. I want to be present." His voice was full of sincerity, but also vulnerability. He knew he couldn't just go back to where everything left off, but he was determined to try for Lucas. Camilla sighed, closing her eyes for a moment as if trying to digest the weight of his words. When she looked at him, there was a mixture of pain and tiredness in her gaze. She knew what he meant, but his words seemed insufficient to erase the years of absence. "It's not just about you wanting to be present, Felipe." His voice was soft but firm. "Being present is not enough. I did what I thought was right for Lucas, and as much as you want to change things now, it takes more than words. You will have to show that you are really here for him, and not just because he felt guilty about not being there." Felipe felt the weight of Camilla's words like a direct slap in the face. He knew she was right. How could he just show up in Lucas's life after all this time? He had no idea how much the boy would need him or what he would do to make up for lost time. But at that moment, he felt he had to try. "I know, Camilla, I don't expect it to be easy. I just need a chance. He is my son." Felipe tried to find the right words, but they seemed insufficient. Camilla wasn't willing to give in so easily, and he knew it. They fell silent again, but this time it wasn't a tense silence. It was a silence filled with repressed emotions, unsaid things, and an uncertain future. Time was passing, but it seemed that none of the words they were exchanging could change what really mattered. What would happen to Lucas? Felipe felt his mind turn to the boy. He needed time to adjust to everything that was happening, but the idea that Lucas might need him was what kept him going. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the emergency room door opened, and the doctor accompanying Lucas entered, bringing a mixture of relief and apprehension. Camilla stood up immediately, her eyes searching the doctor's expression for answers. Felipe, also standing, was tense, his body in a state of alert, awaiting the verdict. "His condition is stable, but he still needs observation. We managed to reduce the fever and stabilize breathing. The infection was serious, but luckily you arrived in time." The doctor spoke clearly and precisely, but her eyes conveyed the tension of the moment. Camilla, whose face was marked with worry, couldn't help but take a deep breath of relief upon hearing the doctor's words. She closed her eyes for a moment, silently thankful that Lucas was out of danger. She knew that time was against them, and the image of her son fighting for his life was something she could never erase from her memory. Felipe was silent for a few seconds, absorbing the information. He knew this news was crucial, but anxiety still hung in the air. What else could happen? What would he do now? His mind couldn't stop, but one thing was clear: he couldn't afford to fail. Not now. "Can we see him?" Felipe asked in a hoarse voice full of concern. The doctor made an affirmative gesture, indicating that they could follow her to the room where Lucas was. "Yes, but only for a few minutes. He is still very weak," the doctor completed, before starting to walk in front of them. Felipe and Camilla walked side by side, but there was an emotional distance between them that neither seemed willing to break. Camilla was in her own internal struggle, processing the responsibility of caring for Lucas alone for so long, while Felipe tried to find a way to be part of that story again. When they arrived at Lucas's room, the sight of the boy, lying pale in the hospital bed, made Felipe's heart sink. But the relief of seeing him conscious was immediate. He was weaker than Felipe imagined, but he was still there. It was as if, on some level, he knew that his presence meant more than anything else. Lucas slowly opened his eyes, and with difficulty murmured, "Mommy." Camilla immediately approached him, holding his hand tenderly and whispering words of comfort, trying to make sure her son knew everything would be okay. Felipe watched this interaction with a heavy heart. He wasn't there as a police officer. Not anymore. He was there like a father, trying to understand how it would be possible to be part of the life of that boy he had just met, but who already meant the world to him. When Lucas looked at Felipe, his eyes were full of confusion. He seemed to be trying to understand who this man was, and for a moment Felipe felt completely helpless. "Who is he, Mummy?" Lucas asked in a weak voice, his curiosity mixed with the vulnerability of a boy who has just faced a fight for his life. Camilla hesitated, and all eyes turned to her. Felipe felt the weight of the question, but knew he couldn't hide the truth any longer. "He's your father, Lucas," Camilla replied, looking at Felipe, and with a sigh added, "He's your father." The silence that followed was heavy, as Lucas looked at Felipe with wide, uncertain eyes. Felipe knelt beside the bed, feeling the weight of his position, and held Lucas's hand gently. "Hi, champion. I'm your father, and—" Felipe's voice trailed off for a moment, but he recovered quickly. "I promise I'll never leave you alone again." Lucas looked at him for a long moment, trying to understand. But deep down, he felt something different, something that perhaps was a trust to be built over time. "Are you my father?" Lucas asked, his voice weak but full of an innocence that broke Felipe's heart. He never imagined he would hear this question. Felipe swallowed, emotion preventing him from speaking for a few seconds. When he finally managed to respond, his voice was firm but filled with regret. "Yes, Lucas, I'm your father, and I'm sorry. I wasn't here sooner. I'm sorry." Lucas didn't respond immediately, but after a long silence, he lightly squeezed Felipe's hand, as if in some way he was accepting that man as part of his life. Confidence wouldn't come immediately, but Felipe knew this was the beginning. The moment was charged with raw and sincere emotion. Felipe still didn't know how he got there. The fact that he was in front of Lucas, hearing the boy call him father, seemed like a dream he never imagined possible. The guilt and regret were present, but he knew he needed to move forward, with his head held high, and start rebuilding what he never had the chance to build. As Lucas began to close his eyes, exhausted from the fever and medication, Felipe sat next to the bed. The sight of the boy, so fragile and vulnerable, made his heart beat faster. He couldn't look away, as if it were necessary to record every detail, every breath Lucas took in his mind. He had wasted so much time, but he didn't want to waste another second. Camilla, still standing next to the bed, watched the scene with mixed feelings. She saw Felipe there, with sincerity written all over his face, and knew he was offering himself to be something he had never been before. But at the same time, she remembered the years of absence, the unfulfilled promises, and the difficulties she faced alone in raising Lucas. Felipe, looking at Camilla, felt impelled to say what he had been holding back for so long. He no longer wanted to remain silent. He no longer wanted to postpone his attempt to redeem himself. "Camilla, I know that words won't change what happened, and I know that I lacked actions, but now I want to be part of his life. I want to be here for him, not just because I feel guilty, but because I really want to be his father." Felipe's voice was firm, but carried with immense weight. He knew he had no right to ask this, but he could no longer hide his desire to be something for Lucas. Camilla looked at him disconcertingly, her eyes wary. She had heard many promises before, but there was something in Felipe's expression that made her stop to reflect. She knew he was asking for much more than just space in Lucas's life. He was asking for the chance to rebuild a relationship that, to her, seemed impossible. "Felipe, you say that now, but what are you going to do from now on?" Camilla replied, the tone of her voice calm, but with a depth that reflected all the wounds she carried. Felipe, upon hearing his words, did not hesitate. He knew the path would be difficult, and that nothing would be easy, but the determination within him was clear. "I'll be here every day. I know it won't be easy, that I'll have to show it with actions and not just words, but it gives me the chance to try to be the father he deserves." Camilla sighed deeply, looking at Felipe with a mixture of distrust and hope. She had been a single mother for so long that the idea of Felipe coming back into their lives seemed almost impossible, but as she looked at Lucas, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was room for a change. Maybe it was possible, yes, to rebuild what seemed too broken. "I don't know, Felipe. You say all this, but actions speak louder than words. Lucas is at the center of it all. He's our priority right now, and if you really want to be in his life, you're going to have to prove that you're willing to be more than a stranger. It will have to be constant, not just for a while, but always." Camilla spoke with a direct, firm tone, and at the same time, a little softer than before. She was testing Felipe, trying to understand if he was ready for what was to come. Felipe swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. It couldn't fail now. He had a chance, and he didn't intend to waste it. He nodded. I understand, Camilla, and I will do whatever is necessary. I want to be part of his life. I want to be there for him and for you too, no matter how long it takes, but I won't fail. The words came out with the certainty of someone who finally understood the weight of the responsibility of being a father. Camilla looked at him, and for a moment it looked like she was trying to find something in Felipe's eyes, maybe some sincerity I hadn't seen before. She took a deep breath. She knew that trusting wouldn't be simple, but she also knew that Lucas's future couldn't be decided alone. So let's see what you can do, Camilla said, with a slight smile that, for the first time, seemed sincere. She looked at Lucas and then at Felipe. Don't expect it to be easy, but it could be the start of something. Felipe smiled slightly, still silent, but with the feeling that, for the first time, he was on the right path. The air in the room became lighter, but it was still thick with the tension of years of distance and distrust. Camilla and Felipe, now closer than ever, tried to understand what this new chapter in their lives meant. But the promise that Felipe had made was not something that could be easily fulfilled. He knew that as much as he wanted to be there for Lucas, he would have to overcome many barriers, not only with his son, but also with Camilla. Felipe looked at Camilla's face, now with a less hardened expression, but still cautious. She watched. The boy with a mix of relief and sadness, a silent pain, reflected in her eyes. She knew that the situation with Felipe would not be simple. They had lost each other for so long, and now he wanted to redeem himself in an instant. But the reality was more complicated than that. Camilla, I know that nothing can erase what happened, but I'm here now, and I want to make a difference. Felipe's voice was softer, but also full of determination. He approached Lucas, who was slowly starting to fall asleep, his vitals stable after the treatment. The hospital light illuminated the boy's face, creating a momentary feeling of peace. Camilla watched Felipe, but didn't know exactly what to think. She wanted to believe it, but the pain of all those years without him in Lucas's life weighed heavily on her heart. She was afraid that once again Felipe would walk away, or worse, that Lucas would get hurt with false hope. I know what you're trying to say, Felipe, and I appreciate it, Camilla began, her voice shaky but firm. But being present is not just a promise. It needs to be a continuous action, and I need to see that. Lucas needs stability. He's already been through so much pain, and I can't let him be hurt again. Felipe felt the pain in Camilla's voice. He knew that at that moment she was trying to protect her son. She was being cautious because she had already been injured too much. But on the other hand, he could see the fragility in her. Perhaps, deep down, she wanted to believe in the possibility of starting over, of offering Lucas something he never had, a family. Camilla, I understand your pain, and I know that I have failed a lot in the past. But I'm here, and I'm going to prove that I can be the father Lucas needs. I won't give up on him. I won't give up on you. Felipe's words were simple, but filled with a sincerity that perhaps Camilla had never seen before. She closed her eyes for a moment, reflecting. She wanted to believe, but she was still afraid to open herself up to what was starting to feel like a second chance for Lucas, for Felipe, for herself. Camilla approached Lucas's bed, placing a hand on his forehead, stroking her son's hair with the softness of a mother who already knew what suffering was like. She took a deep breath, looking at Felipe with doubt still weighing on her, but with a small glimmer of hope in her eyes. Felipe, Camilla started to speak, but her voice faltered. I just want the best for him. I just want him to be happy and healthy. And if you're really ready to be part of his life, you're going to have to show it with actions, not just words. You'll have to prove that you're really here for him. And it will be difficult. It won't be easy for any of us. Felipe nodded, his expression now more resolute. He no longer had easy answers. But what he had was the willingness to fight, even if it meant having to go a long way to regain Camilla's trust, and to earn Lucas's trust. I know, Camilla, I know it won't be easy, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes, and I will prove at every step that I am here for both of you. Felipe said, his eyes fixed on Camilla, looking for some reaction from her. She looked at him for a moment, speechless, but something in her expression began to change. Maybe it was the accumulated tiredness, or maybe it was the small gesture of sincerity that she had finally seen in Felipe. She still didn't know what the future would bring, but she felt that perhaps there was a possibility of a fresh start. Felipe looked at Lucas once again. The boy, although still weak, seemed to be at peace, and in that moment he made a silent promise. No matter what happened, he would do everything possible for Lucas to have the life he deserved, even if it meant starting from scratch. After the silent conversation between Camilla and Felipe, a new weight hung on his shoulders. It was no longer just about what he could do in that moment. It was about the future, about the role he would have in Lucas's life from now on. He knew it wouldn't be easy, and more than ever the pressure was on his hands. But he was determined to do things right, even if the road was long. Felipe stayed next to Lucas while he slept. The boy was still weak, but the relief of seeing him breathing more calmly gave him a sense of hope. He lightly touched Lucas's hand, feeling the heat of the boy's body. There, in the silence of the hospital room, Felipe felt a connection deeper than he ever imagined possible. Camilla, on the other hand, was still in emotional turmoil. She knew that Felipe's presence was essential, but the wounds of the past were far from healing. Even if she wanted to believe it, the pain of being a single mother all those years was a constant shadow in her life. How can you trust someone who walked away so easily before? How to give him the power to be the father Lucas needed so much? Felipe noticed Camilla's caution, but knew she wasn't closing herself off out of spite. She was protecting herself. She was protecting her son, like every mother would. He knew that in order to get close to Lucas, he would have to show not only that he was present, but that he would be constant. He would have to prove his dedication every time he was with the boy, always with actions, never with empty promises. During the following days, Felipe remained by Camilla and Lucas's side at the hospital, trying to show, through simple gestures, that he was willing to be the stable presence the boy needed. He attended the doctor's daily visits, asked questions about the treatment, and never stopped being there when Lucas woke up, even though the boy was still in a fragile state. But as the days passed, Felipe knew that the biggest challenge was yet to come. He would have to be more than just a biological father. He would have to be a real father, someone Lucas could trust. And it wasn't enough to just show responsibility in times of crisis. He would have to be there for the little things, too. One of the first steps in this process was when Felipe asked to take Lucas for a short walk in the hospital garden. He knew the boy was still weak, but he wanted to use this moment to start building a bond. Camilla hesitated, but, seeing Felipe's effort, ended up agreeing. They walked together in silence, but Felipe noticed that Lucas was watching him with cautious curiosity, as if trying to understand who this man was and what he wanted. During the walk, Felipe asked the boy simple questions about what he liked to do, about his favorite games. Lucas, although shy, began to open up, responding with small words, but with a look that slowly became more confident. Felipe knew that this was just the beginning of a long journey to win his son's heart. Camilla watched them from afar, With a look that mixed hope and caution. She still didn't know if Felipe was really ready to assume his fatherhood, but for the first time, she saw something in his eyes. It wasn't just the promise of being there, but something more. It was the desire to do right, to correct the mistakes of the past, to be a father to Lucas, not just a man who had fathered him. As the days passed, the atmosphere in the hospital became less tense, but still filled with a certain uncertainty. Felipe knew that Camilla couldn't just erase what had happened between them. The 10 years of absence, the broken promises, and the pain of separation were burned into his memories, and he couldn't expect her to trust him again without demonstrating. Her commitment, Felipe's every gesture, every word needed to be thought out carefully. He could no longer be the man he used to be, the one who dedicated himself to work to the detriment of his family. The stakes were much greater now, and he knew that regaining Camilla's trust would be a long and difficult road. He had to prove himself, not just to her, but especially to Lucas. At one point, Felipe sat with Camilla on the small hospital waiting bench. It was a simple conversation, but full of meaning. Camilla looked at him, her eyes still full of reservations, but also with a slight hint of curiosity, perhaps even a guarded hope. "You know, Felipe, that I can't trust you just because you showed up again, right?" Camilla said, her voice calm but firm. Felipe took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her words. He knew she was right. "I know, Camilla. I know I have a lot to prove. But for Lucas, I'll do whatever it takes. I want to be present, and not just for now, but forever." She looked at him for a long time, her eyes filled with silent pain. She was afraid of giving herself in again, afraid of suffering once again. She could no longer let her life be dominated by empty promises. But there was something in Felipe's eyes that made her question whether he could really change. "I'm not asking you to be perfect, Felipe. I don't want promises you can't keep, but what you do for him every day is what will show if you really care." Felipe nodded, aware that she was right. He knew that the path to regaining Camilla's trust, and Lucas's, would not be easy. He would have to reinvent himself. He would have to show it with actions, not words. In the following days, Felipe dedicated himself to taking care of Lucas and supporting Camilla at every moment. Not only was he by the boy's side, but he also helped Camilla with simple tasks, such as bringing her coffee or keeping up with her doctor's appointments. He wanted to be more than just a man who suddenly appeared. He wanted to be a constant, reliable, and above all, responsible presence. There were moments when Lucas still looked at him suspiciously, as if he didn't quite understand what was happening. But Felipe didn't care. He knew that everything would have its time. He knew he couldn't force anyone's trust, especially Lucas's, but he was willing to be patient. Felipe began to notice that Lucas, even though he was weak and tired, was slowly beginning to open his heart. He made a point of being present in every little victory the boy had. Like when he managed to get out of bed to walk a little down the hallway, Felipe was there to celebrate, to support, to show that he would be a present father, even in the simplest moments. Camilla, seeing this, began to notice something she hadn't noticed before. Felipe was acting differently. He was no longer trying to prove something with grandiose words. He was demonstrating his change through small but meaningful actions. And for Camilla, these actions started to make a difference. She still had her doubts, but for the first time, in a long time, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, Lucas's life would have a more balanced future, with Felipe, in some way, by their side. Do you believe in this change from Felipe? Write in the comments. The time in the hospital was a turning point for Felipe and Camilla. Lucas was already recovering, and while he was resting, Felipe and Camilla were growing closer, not just as ex-spouses, but as two people who were beginning to understand what it meant to be family again. One morning, while Lucas was under observation, Camilla decided to take a short break. She sat next to Felipe on the bench in the hallway, without rushing, without pressure. The atmosphere was calmer, more relaxed. There were no screams of emergency, just the soft sound of monitoring machines and the movement of doctors and nurses. Camilla looked at Felipe with a slightly softer but still cautious expression. She knew Felipe was trying, but she also knew their journey wouldn't be easy. She didn't want to fool herself, and she also didn't want to give Lucas false hope. But something inside her made her wonder if perhaps finally they were beginning to build a new foundation. Felipe, who was already getting used to the idea of a new beginning, turned to Camilla and said in a sincere tone, "I can't change what happened, Camilla. I know I let the past destroy us in some way, but what I can do is really try now, trying to be the father Lucas deserves. And not only that, try to be the man you deserve too." Camilla took a deep breath and looked at the floor, his words still echoing in her mind. She remembered everything she had been through, the pain of separation, the emotional exhaustion. She also knew that Felipe had been impulsive and immature back then, but now there was a difference. "I don't know, Felipe. I don't know if I can trust that quickly, but I see what you're trying to do, and that, for some reason, gives me hope, albeit a very small one." Felipe smiled slightly, feeling relieved to see that she was, in some way, open to the idea of reconciliation. He knew he still had a long way to go, but at least the first step had been taken. He didn't want Camilla to believe that everything would be perfect, but he wanted her to know that he was committed to being a good father to Lucas. What Felipe didn't yet know was that this moment, a simple but so significant conversation, would be the basis of a possible reconstruction. Camilla was still skeptical, but her guard was lowering, step by step. For Felipe, this was already a great victory. During the following days, he continued to show that, more than repentant, he was determined to change. When Lucas was finally released from the hospital, Felipe had the privilege of accompanying him home. Camilla allowed him to drive with her, something that would never have happened before. Upon entering the house, Lucas, still a little fragile, looked at Felipe with that curious expression, but with something more, confidence. Felipe felt his heart sink when he saw the boy trying to get used to his presence. He knew that the road to becoming part of Lucas's life would be long, but the first step had already been taken. Felipe couldn't force the connection, but he knew it would happen at the right time. Now in their home, they were just beginning to adjust to the idea of a new family dynamic. Felipe and Camilla were still a long way from being a couple, but there was something more important there, a foundation of respect, a connection under reconstruction, and most importantly, a future in which Felipe would be present in Lucas's life. Felipe made a promise to himself he would not fail again, and so, as their lives began to reorganize around a new possibility, a new chance, Felipe looked to the future with more confidence. He had many mistakes to correct, but he knew that with patience and concrete actions, he could finally prove his worth, both to Camilla and Lucas. The story that began with a simple traffic stop and turned into a journey of rediscovery, forgiveness, and reconciliation was a reminder that even when time and circumstances seem distant and unforgiving, there is always an opportunity to change and start over. True strength lies in being present when it matters most. Have you ever seen something similar happen? Share your experience in the comments.